Oh, Dave Meltzer. How he just comes up with things. Now, we're being told by Dave Meltzer that there is a slew of former WWE talent refusing to do jobs on the indies, refusing to do jobs in AEW. It's become such a huge problem that Meltzer is talking about it in the newsletter and speaking to other wrestlers and indie promoters, none of whom are named, about these wrestlers, also none of whom are named. But it's gripping stuff. Praise be to this Trevor Dame individual on Twitter who tweeted out this entire passage from the Wrestling Observer newsletter. I shall read it thusly. One of the things when it comes to the difference with WWE talent that lost constantly in WWE and going to AEW and never wanting to lose. Then in brackets it says, and that goes for the indies as well, not just AEW, is something one person very involved with a lot of the talent on the major indie scene noted to us. And it's a quote here. One day we'll have the discussion about WWE trauma. People leave that company and are so traumatized by their booking, they overcompensate on exit as a defense mechanism. Even people who were, and I don't want to use the term jobbers, because that gets used incorrectly too often, those who are at a level in WWE where they be expected to lose a lot, and he put in brackets, mentioned names of several wrestlers who were on the low end in WWE when they were cut. They leave WWE and immediately take on a no jobs policy. Even if you put them in a situation where losing would get them over more, or just makes total sense since they're in a small town for a show that isn't being recorded against a local top guy, they won't lose. Because of their WWE trauma, they equate being asked to lose as getting buried, which isn't the same thing at all. But that's the mentality they've developed when losing a lot in WWE does actually mean that you're getting buried. Or you're a secondary women's champion. So I don't get why a major star doesn't see the advantages in losing and reacts so negatively to the mere suggestion of it. From experience, any loss is giving up control and flashes back to experience in WWE. I don't think there's a way to fix that, unfortunately. Or if there is, I certainly haven't found the trick yet, because I couldn't convince, and he put it in brackets, a few wrestlers' names on the indies to take a loss when I tried. Look at the name withheld. The guy hated doing jobs in AEW, unless it was versus others he perceived as top guys, in brackets, ex-WWE guys. Now he walked right back into WWE and has literally been losing since day 2 of his return. But no complaints, no pushback. It's just such an interesting deal how people look at WWE jobs being the cost of doing business, but elsewhere it's a slap in the face. This is a really long quote that supposedly somebody told Meltzer that he was not, of course, man enough to actually name names. Now, everybody who has read this noted that the guy at the bottom is most likely Andrade, right? So here's the issue. Before we start getting into the blind items about guys like Andrade and Miro and Malachi Black, they're refusing to lose. Ricky Starks and all these guys, they refuse to do jobs. They refuse to do business, which is kind of like poison in the well and everything. Let's talk about the general idea of a promoter paying somebody who was on national television, let's say for a little while, just to bring them in and do jobs. No, for starters, wrestlers are notoriously picky about doing jobs, especially if they were presented in a certain way. Now, this is actually the opposite. It would be the opposite problem If you were promoted on WWE strongly, you wouldn't want to go on the indies and you wouldn't want to go to AEW and then be perceived as weak. It would not be a situation where I did a bunch of jobs in WWE. I'm not doing any jobs on the indies because you're already kind of a jabroni. So it doesn't really matter that much. And plus, it's the promoter's money. So what? I mean, if at that point, so what? But your ego does start to play with you. It starts to attack you. It starts to bother you. If you were presented as a top guy and now somebody's asking you to go in there and lose to Joe Schmo applesauce in the middle of buttfuck Nebraska. I mean, that is a concern here. But it would not be... Everybody that we know have had these kind of no-job policies, like Rob Van Dam in TNA. He was refusing to do jobs. Rob Van Dam was not a jabroni in WWE. He was a top guy when he was in WWE. Now, he wasn't the top guy, but he was a perennial mid-carder. He won more than he lost, but he just never won a world title or challenged for one that often. I'm talking about his first run when he went to TNA. And he was noticeably avoidant of doing jobs. But this is the case when Greg the Hammer Valentine was talking about quitting jobs, working in places because he was asked to do a job. He quit the WWF because he was asked to do a job. Honky Tonk Man was notoriously fired from WCW because he refused to do a job. This stuff is not these guys have WWE trauma. Most of these guys have big egos. And if they don't see that the guy is worth doing a job to, they don't want to do the job. If they don't like how it's presented to them, they don't want to do a job. I'll give you a good example. I watched Greg the Hammer Valentine talk about doing a job. I forgot who it was for, but he said he didn't want to do the job. And the reason why he didn't want to do a job is, in his mind, he's not a jabroni. He's been there for a while. He's talking about being in the WWF. He had won championships. He wanted to look strong in some way after losing. So he says there has to be something in it for me. What's in it for me? And when he says what's in it for me isn't just, am I being paid for this, but how is my character going to recover? What's my next angle? And he gave some ideas like, hey, am I going to jump him after the match and get my heat back? Am I going to get a rematch? Something. Tell me something. Don't just tell me you're going to go do this job for this guy, because then I just look like a jabroni, just go and lay down for this dude. And you could say, well, look, Greg Valentine, who the fuck cares, really? At the same time, though, it's an interesting point to make. If you're not a jabroni, right, and you're not a guy who goes out there and just does jobs, if you're looking strong, then the job is okay. You get the attack after the match. You get the promo after the match. You get a rematch down the line or something like this guy's going to go on to be the world champion or whatever the fuck. That's something in it for you that protects your character, because ultimately in wrestling, and this is a fact, you are your only advocate. Okay? It's up to you, to protect your character and protect your business. Now, Vince had a way of, if you don't want to do jobs, he will basically force you to do a bunch of jobs. Now, Undertaker talked about Scott Hall doing jobs, and this was a notorious thing where he said that Scott Hall didn't like the cross nutty arms after the tombstone. They had worked apparently some house shows. I don't know if they ever recorded an Undertaker Razor Ramon match. It might have been on one of those Coliseum home videos or something. But he said that Scott would stiffen his arms so Undertaker couldn't cross his arms after the tombstone, as a way of avoiding the crossed arms. Because in his mind, getting tombstoned and getting your arms crossed in the middle of the ring was being treated like a jabroni. And he didn't want that. So they had to have a conversation about that. And I get it. I don't get it, but I get it. You feel me? It's one of those things where you're not the one doing the job. right? You're already agreeing to do the job. At least let me keep some pride when I gotta do it, you know? And if you have no experience convincing guys to do jobs, or you're just a promoter and you're just used to people saying, hey, this guy's going over tonight, and then that's it, then you're not used to managing personalities. It's the exact same thing on a football team or something like that, where the team wants to win, sure, but this guy's got a financial incentive to get a certain amount of yards in the game. So that means he wants you to throw him the ball. You know, he's got to run the ball because he's got in his contract that there's a certain amount of things he needs to have done. A lot of these wrestlers are like that. Where not that they have things in their contracts, but that they see themselves as an investment. And they have to invest in their own character, and they have to protect their own character. And if you don't have anything in mind that is going to protect their character, then they have to. Now, in WWE, they were going to be probably paid more to do these jobs, and they were probably going to do these jobs to bigger stars, or they were doing jobs to bigger stars who were in better situations, right? Now, let's talk about the people that the internet has notoriously said were refusing to do jobs. Like, for starters, Aleister Black. That's one of the things, Malachi Black. He was not a jabroni in WWE. He actually rarely lost. In fact, I don't think Vince ever beat him clean in the middle of the ring. I'm trying to think of whenever Vince would have booked him to lose, which I don't think. Now that he certainly lost matches, but I'm not sure he just got beat in the middle of the ring, clean with no follow up. You know, he's not in a storyline. He's not going to get a rematch or something like that. I can't imagine that was the case. Same thing with Miro. You know, when he was Rusev. Rusev did plenty of jobs, you know, but he did jobs in storylines. Like just doing random jobs on TV. I don't think Rusev was that guy. I don't think he was the guy that just did random jobs on TV. You know, Andrade, he was lower on the card than Malachi, Aleister, and Rusev and all those guys. But I don't remember him just doing random jobs on TV. I know if he did do a random job, I remember he lost to Drew McIntyre a lot in 2020. But Drew McIntyre was the fucking world champion at the time. You know, like I remember Andrade losing to Drew McIntyre. I don't remember him just going out there losing to like random people though. Like again, without these folks discussing the circumstance, to me it just seems like they want to use WWE as an excuse why these guys don't want to do jobs when it's really the wrestler's ego. You did not do a good enough job of convincing them that the loss will benefit them or benefit the guy who's going to win or benefit the company. You know, your failure to convince a wrestler to do something is on you. It's not on the company that you used to work for. And again, I've heard plenty of shoot interviews. Some guys hate doing jobs. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. Other guys, right time, right place, right guy, I'll do the job, no problem. But if you're trying to get me beat by some goofy ass dude and there's no follow-up, I'm just off TV for 2 weeks. Or if they see how you treat other people who do a bunch of jobs. Like in WWE, you can do jobs and be on TV every week. That's why it didn't matter. You know, they think, oh, you're getting buried. What you talking about? The Miz will go out there and lose to Akira Tozawa, lose to R-Truth, lose to a girl, and then 2 weeks later, he's the Intercontinental Champion. Like, that's the weird stuff that Vince would do, where these guys would go out there, do a bunch of jobs, and still end up being a champion at the end of the year. They'll still be in the storyline. They'll still be a focus of the show, but they'll lose like every other match. If you don't book that way, and your jabronis are just people who get beat and then disappear, like in AEW, like a Lance Archer, for instance. A guy who just loses, and he gets nothing out of it. He doesn't get to attack guys after the match. He doesn't get a promo segment to get his heat back. He doesn't enter a feud with these people that leads to something. he just loses, and then he starts the cycle all over again. The Brian Cages. These guys have been beat to shit. Sorry, this is not going to work. But here's the issue is they're trying to, instead of telling the truth, what they're trying to do is train the people who read the Observer to think that WWE is destroying the mentality of these wrestlers and getting them to think that losing is being buried. When in reality, they're not marks. They know that winning and losing is a negotiation. And you have to negotiate the loss. If you're going to take the L, you got to get something out of it. And especially if you are a name and you mean something. Especially if you're a name and you want to go somewhere else. For instance, somebody like Andrade wants to go back to Mexico and be considered a big star. Why the fuck would he want to go and be a jabroni on television and then go back to Mexico and still be a big star? That doesn't make sense. Right? Doesn't make sense to me. Because that's what he was doing. He was going back to Mexico wrestling. He wants to be considered a big star down there. He don't want to be he's a jabroni on TV, so he's going to come down here and be a big star. I'm like, what the? No. And he sees you don't do that to other people. You're not doing that to Okada. He ain't going out there doing a bunch of jam jobs and then going back to Japan, like a shining star. No, I'm not going to do it. Now it's up to you to convince him why losing is a good idea. What's in it for him? And that's the collaborative effort in wrestling. Who are you going to do the job to? What's in it for you? What's the follow-up? That's what you're supposed to do. If you just get in the habit of telling this guy you're going to put this guy over, and then he just tells you no, because he doesn't have to. I mean, look at the situation that you put yourself in. You hired these guys on guaranteed contracts. So you have to pay them whether they work or not, and then they can refuse work. That should be an immediate breach of contract, but he doesn't ever breach anybody's contract. But they can sit at home and refuse to do jobs. Because your creative or whatever is so bad that the people don't want to participate. Again, Stone Cold Steve Austin walked out famously because he didn't want to do a job. These guys have refused to do. People have done this stuff before. This is not something that's new that AEW has to deal with. Guys with egos will refuse to do jobs. Hulk Hogan notoriously refused to do jobs all the time. And then to show that he wasn't a mark for himself and that beating him has to actually mean something, he agreed to do a job to Billy Kidman, of all people, just to prove a point. And he proved that point because it didn't mean shit. It only diminished Hulk Hogan. It didn't boost Billy Kidman at all. Because the guy who was booking it was a fucking idiot who thought that you could just, that these were, like you were playing checkers, like we're going to take this piece by jumping this piece and that's it. And there was no thoughts, no plans, no strategy, no conception that Billy Kidman was not over enough to beat Hulk Hogan. That in the right situation with the right person, beating Hulk Hogan could turn you into Bill Goldberg. It didn't turn Billy Kidman into Bill Goldberg because Bill Goldberg was already over before you beat Hulk Hogan. Do you get what I'm saying here? So Tony Khan is likely the person that, Meltzer is talking to here. And they're having these clandestine discussions about these wrestlers behind their backs and just making assumptions that guys are refusing to do jobs or whatever. When in reality, it might be not that they're refusing to do a job, but they hate the creative direction, which also includes them doing jobs, But it's hilarious because, again, one of Tony's favorite toys right now is Mercedes Moné, Sasha Banks, who literally just a couple of weeks ago did a live stream where she was rolling her eyes because people wanted her to go back to WWE and she don't want to go back because she don't want to lose. Her whole thing is she was tired of losing. She didn't want to lose anymore. So she left. That's why she threw a tantrum and left, because she don't want to do jobs. So now what do you think is going to happen when Tony Khan wants her to do a job? Let's see what happens when it's time to cross that bridge. Is he going to be able to convince her to do a job? We'll see, right? But it's a notorious thing. I can go through a laundry list of people who have refused to do jobs, from Rob Van Dam to Greg the Hammer Valentine to the Honky Tonk Man to Hulk Hogan to Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper was notorious for refusing to do jobs and was honest about it. He wouldn't do a job to Hulk Hogan. Roddy Piper notoriously refused to do jobs to Hulk Hogan. That's why he was never... And Hogan, he's a liar and all, but he was right when he said Piper put a ceiling on himself, because every Piper match was a brawl that ended in disqualification. The only time he actually agreed to do a job was to Bret Hart. And that was, when he was in his prime. Before that, he refused to do jobs. That's why he had to be replaced by like Paul Orndorff and guys who were willing to let Hogan win. Piper could have made a lot more money. He could have made even more WrestleManias, but he refused to do jobs. And Vince negotiated this stuff. Okay, I'm just going to put you in a different position then. You don't got to lose. Just go out there and get disqualified then. You're over enough that, this stuff won't matter. And I want to keep you featured on the show, but you're a knucklehead, so we're going to put you over here. All right? Jake the Snake Roberts refused to do the job at WrestleMania 8 unless Vince was going to let him out of his contract. And Vince agreed. Vince was like, okay, that's what it's going to take to get you in the ring. We'll do it. So Jake Roberts got his release. Vince McMahon got Jake Roberts to do the job. That was it. Business is done. Business is handled. Right? If your creative is Tony wants you to lose to Fuego del Sol, and you're like, why? Which is almost always going to be the wrestlers, especially if he's a named wrestler and he's been around for a while. I'm just using Fuego del Sol as an example. I'm not saying that this literally happened. Let's use a different name. They want you to do a job to Danny Garcia. All right. Why? Well, that's what Tony wants. Okay, what's in it for me? We don't really have any creative plans for you right now. We're trying to do this thing with Daniel Garcia. We're trying to build him up. And it's like, oh, so fuck me. Right? Like, I'm just a body that you're going to throw at Daniel Garcia to build him up to make him look good, right? This was a conversation that Baron Corbin had recently. I think he was on the Chris Van Vliet podcast. And he was talking about overhearing somebody in WWE production or creative or whichever say that they need bodies, quote unquote, for Jacob Fatu. Basically, they just need guys to go in there and do jobs and get knocked around for Jacob Fatu. And he was offended by that because he has an ego. And he's like, I've been here for a while. My name kind of means something. And, you don't just throw people around like that. You can't treat people like this. You can't just tell me to go out there and be a body for a guy. That's kind of fucked up. You got to look at it from his perspective sometimes. And what Meltzer is talking about here, he's not saying, oh, they don't understand that they could get more over from taking a loss. Oh yeah? How exactly? That's what you're supposed to be telling them. You're supposed to tell them how if you do this job, man, it could make your career. Stone Cold Steve Austin's career was made off of a loss. Right? I'm sure that whole thing was negotiated. That whole pitch. How is he going to lose this match without losing his heat? How is he going to lose this match without destroying his character? That was a negotiation. That's how you talk these things out. That's how you get somebody to do a job. Even if it's a job they don't want to do. Notoriously, Steve Austin didn't want to do the submission match for that reason. He had momentum and he didn't want to go out there be made to quit in front of the world at WrestleMania and destroy his character. So they negotiated the pass out so that he gets to keep his character intact. Brett gets to win. Vince wants Brett to win, so then they get that. And you get the reward, the double reward of Steve Austin losing in a super heroic way, and he got over as a babyface. So you negotiated how Steve Austin could lose this match and how it would benefit him and his character. And they got it done. Tony Khan apparently doesn't do this. That's why so many characters have a quote-unquote no job policy. It ain't because they're just WWE trauma. They're not jabronis. Nobody I can think of off the top of my head that they have played this game with, that they're refusing creative, they're refusing to do jobs. None of these people were jabronis. None of them. It's not like Scotty 2 Hotty is in AEW now all of a sudden refusing to do jobs, shaking in the corner at the thought of doing a job. Bullshit. You don't know how to negotiate how this loss will benefit them in their career or how it will benefit the company. Because quite often, people catch losses and it has to benefit somebody. Even when you talk about somebody like Will Ospreay, right? Will Ospreay had to negotiate his losses because he is a high value investment in AEW. So when he decided he was going to lose to, I don't know, what was that, Kyle Fletcher maybe? Okay, now he knows that Kyle Fletcher is going to get to have a career. For starters, they're friends. So he's willing to do the job for a friend, right? He went out there to do the job for Swerve to prove a point. Swerve is the world champion. You can always lose to the world champion unless you're Roddy Piper. You know, you can always lose to the world champion and be fine. These guys are negotiating losses. They're not just going out there losing to random people and random tournament matches and stuff like this. These things have some kind of end goal. If you cannot clarify that end goal and communicate it to the talent because you're operating through agents or production team or writers or whatever, then they're going to refuse it. Don't you think that Vince gets people refusing to do jobs all the time? I bet Triple H is getting guys refusing to do jobs all the time too. You have to sit them down and say, hey, look, here's what we're going to do. Here's why this is happening. And this is what we got for you next. You know? And then maybe that'll make them feel better about doing the job. They feel like they're still part of the team. It is not well, they're thinking they're getting buried. Well, if you have nothing else for them, then yeah, they probably are going to feel like they're getting buried. Because you have no creative vision for them outside of, I need you to go do this job. Now, I'm on team go do the fucking job, by the way. After all 30 minutes of me rambling about this, I'm on team you're getting paid, go do the fucking job. I'm on that team. Do what you're told. But at the same time, I understand it. You know? Because it's not me that has to do the job. And sometimes people come up with these humiliating ways for guys to do jobs. You know? And it's not fair. But it's real. And these guys, none of these guys are rookies or anything like that either. And they're not known for having like these Bill Goldberg, Hulk Hogan size egos either. So it's not them. It's all on Tony. If they rejected your creative, it's because you failed to appropriately communicate what you were trying to execute here and what's in it for them.